Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is the Ukraine war news update. I guess with my breaking news piece on Lauren Chen and her visa being secured by the State Department. This is a third news piece today concerning the war in Ukraine, and we're going to talk about geopolitics. Recently, I've been doing these as lives. This is going to be a pre-record just for a bit of a change for you. And we're going to start by looking again at the supposed attack on Putin's house, just briefly, because I've dealt with this a couple of times already. Just to remind you before we get into the details, if you haven't already, please like, subscribe and share. It makes a difference to the channel and keeps you in the loop. Right, let's get to the details. So Noel Report said it gets better. It gets even better, he said, as there was this talk of another phone call between Putin and Trump, where Putin told Trump that that his house had been targeted in a drone attack. 91 drones, said Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, attacked the Novgorod house, even though only 18 drones in Novgorod were claimed to have been in the skies there by the Russian air defenses, and they shot down all of them. So there's contradictions in what the Russians said. No evidence of these drones. Russians have come out and said, we don't need evidence. It was all shot down. It's all very convenient. And also, in order to get to that place, you'd have to go through loads of layers of air defense that would have taken them down previously. It's just basically impossible. Then they spoke to a bunch of people who live in the area. 14 different people, I think, a Russian media outlet spoke to, and none of them heard anything. There was no noise of attack. So it didn't happen, as far as, unless we are presented with evidence to suggest otherwise. Right now, it seems that just didn't happen. But yet Trump believed Putin when Putin phoned him and was shocked and outraged, is really angry about what took place, and that was really quite depressing. Trump is very clearly wanting to believe Russia and wanting to find evidence that Ukraine are the bad guys. Putin said Ushakov spoke about the phone call between Trump and Putin. Ushakov said that President Trump was shocked and appalled and could not even imagine such insane actions. Allegedly, Trump said, thank God USA didn't give them tomahawks to Ukraine, so on and so forth. Anyway, this has been denied by the Ukrainians. The Russians have then come out and said, objectively, we've been given a free hand. This is, I think, Fighter Bomber that said this. It would be weak of us to strike back at Zelensky's residence. Actually, it's open season on government agencies and government buildings, military industry, possibly not the Ministry of Health, even though they hide all sorts of military in hospitals and yada, yada, yada. So we appear to be at a stage where the Russians are gearing up to do a retaliatory strike, where there will be a step change in what they are striking. So expect there to be big strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure, governmental, administrative infrastructure and buildings in a way that we haven't seen previously. And then you've had all sorts of international condemnation. The leaders of India, or foreign ministers of India, China, and particularly Pakistan. Pakistan went really hard at the Ukrainians. Like, hang on, there's no evidence this actually happened. And yet they're jumping in and attacking the Ukrainians for this. This is a massive success for the Russians. They've then announced that this changes negotiations. So it's an excuse for them not to continue to negotiate with Ukraine or give any concessions to Ukraine. They're going to change the way they approach their negotiations from now on. Andriy Sybiha here, I've already told you this morning, denied it and said it's a false flag operation. First, Russia's already struck the Ukrainian government building this year. Second, Ukraine only strikes legitimate military targets in the Russian territory in response to Russian strikes in Ukraine. And third, Russia is the aggressor, and Ukraine is a country that has been attacked and defends itself according to Article 51 of the UN Charter. There can be no false equivalence between the aggressor and a country defending itself, saying that this was just fabricated to create a pretext and false justification for Russia's further attacks against Ukraine and undermine or impede the peace process. And I think that pretty much sums it all up. He's then come out and said Russia still hasn't provided any evidence of the alleged attack on Putin's residence because it simply didn't happen. this is Andrei Sabiha. He criticized the UAE as another nation that's come out. UAE, India, and Pakistan for expressing concern while staying silent after a real Russian missile attack hit Ukraine's government building on September the 7th. So complete double standards going on with some of these international diplomats and delegations and dignitaries. The US demands that Ukraine takes real steps to resolve the war and not hide behind demands for a temporary ceasefire. This is Ushakov again. After the negotiations between the US and Ukraine, which was sandwiched by Trump phoning Putin before the meeting and after the meeting, and then the next day where Putin complained about the supposed drone attack on his residence. So that appears to be 3 phone calls with Putin around this meeting as either how desperate Russia are or how much Russia know they can manipulate Trump, right? And Trump appears to be completely manipulated because he came out and said, Russia are just really interested in Ukraine succeeding. No, they're not. No, they're not at all. Why would you say that? So Trump just has no grasp of what's going on. It's really interesting to listen to an analysis. I think Antti Scaramucci was saying this with Katty Kay, and both of them have their contacts, particularly in the Republican Party. I mean, Katty Kay, right across as a journalist, knows people on the Democrat and Republican side. Antti Scaramucci is a former kind of Republican, and having worked for Trump before, as is I think comms guy famously for only 11 days, but in Trump 1.0. But he knows Trump and he knows Trump's people. A lot of people apparently saying Trump is really, really tired at the moment. Like the way he looks on camera, that is how he is. And apparently, even on a golf course, he's pretty exhausted. He's got bruises on both hands now that have turned up, which therefore invalidates the excuse that Caroline Leavitt, the White House press spokesperson, says. Her excuse is that he gets the bruises from shaking hands. But if he's got it on his left hand as well as his right hand, he doesn't shake hands with the left hand. So that's a load of rubbish. He's not well, and he is old, and he's very tired, and possibly tired because he's on dementia drugs. That's one of the theories of why he's got bruised hands, because he takes intravenous medication through his hands. And one of these ones was it Lecempic or something? One of the dementia drugs that also makes you tired. He's got swollen ankles, so on and so forth. So, and he's just often talking complete nonsense. But anyway, he was talking just abject nonsense, I think, in the press conference with Zelenskyy, and Zelenskyy was trying hard. Well, he's biting his tongue an awful lot, but giving the facial expressions that indicated to us all that he really knew that what Trump was saying was just a load of absolute rubbish. And then Ushakov here saying the US demands that Ukraine take real steps to resolve the war, not hide behind demands for a temporary ceasefire. That was what I was going to say. So Trump remember prior to Anchorage, where he met Putin in Alaska, Trump had been advocating very, very, very strongly for a ceasefire. It's like, there must be a ceasefire. Meets with Putin. Putin convinces him that ceasefire is nonsense because Putin does not want a ceasefire. Right? He's just against Russia's aims there. Trump comes out of Anchorage and he goes, oh yeah, it turns out ceasefires are useless, pointless having a ceasefire. But hang on, you were just advocating for that hugely, and Ukraine said they're up for a ceasefire, and that's not a problem. Then he said, okay, they need elections. So Ukraine said, okay, we'll have elections, but we need a ceasefire in order to have a referendum or have elections or so on and so forth. All these things you want us to do, we need a ceasefire in order to do them. The security guarantees to make sure that while we're trying to hold an election, we're not getting a crap bombed out of us by the Russians as we queue up for, and we pull the soldiers off the front line in order to vote, so on and so forth. So yeah, we'll do that, but we need a ceasefire. And Trump then says at this, when Zelenskyy said we're up for a 60 to 90 day ceasefire, Trump then says yet again at the press conference that ceasefire is not on, and he says, and I understand. I mean, it's one of the worst parts of the. In fact, I'll try and find you the audio for this because I think it's a real indicator of how far gone Trump is. Honestly, this is a shocker from Trump. This is a shocker.
Steve and with Jared and Marco and everybody.
Did Russia agree, or did Putin agree to a ceasefire to allow a referendum to take place?
Not a ceasefire. And that's one of the points that we're working on right now. No, not a ceasefire. He feels that, look, they're fighting and to stop, and then if they have to start again, which is a possibility, he doesn't want to be in that position. I understand that position.
I understand that position. What, you understand that he doesn't want a ceasefire because then you have to start and then you stop and then you start again? Well, yeah, that's a ceasefire. It's literally, that's what a ceasefire is. Like, and if you continue, if you have a ceasefire for 60 days, you're fighting before the ceasefire, you stop, and then you start fighting again after the ceasefire, unless you can come to some arrangement within that 60-day period. Like, he doesn't want to do that, says Trump of Putin, and I understand that position. Why? What? Your justification of that is that he doesn't want to stop and start again. What? This is like, he should be challenged on this. The journalists should be, hang on, wait a second there, President, Mr. President. Why don't you want a ceasefire? What is wrong with stopping and then starting again if it's going to allow an election to take place, which is what you've been calling for? This is ridiculous rhetoric from this befuddled fool.
The president feels strongly about that or something, but I think we're finding ways that we can get.
The president feels strongly about that, not having a ceasefire or something. What? What?
Feel strongly about that or something, but I think we're finding ways that we can get around that. But I understand.
We're finding ways that we can get around that. We get around a ceasefire. What the hell are you talking about?
President Putin, from that standpoint, you have to understand the other side. And, I'm on the side of peace. I'm on the side of stopping the war. So, but I think that's a problem that's going to get solved. Yeah.
Putin doesn't want a ceasefire. And I understand that, or something. But that's a problem that's going to get solved. We'll have a ceasefire. I mean, you solve that by having a ceasefire. What? It's just a mess. Like, we normalize this kind of talking from Trump because we hear it so often and we just like, yeah, whatever. But we need to actually unpick this and go, hang on, mate. None of that made any sense. And we're none the clearer whatsoever. And you appear to just be wanting to agree with Putin's position on account of Putin saying it rather than any kind of rationale, because you've not exhibited any kind of rationale there whatsoever. You just blah, 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 words just tumble out of your mouth or something. This guy is not fit to rule the United States of America, and anyone that thinks he does has got it wrong. Sorry, you've got it wrong. This is Putin saying this at a meeting. It is necessary to continue the SMO, the war. We must gain full control over the city of Zaporizhzhia. The Russian army is 15 kilometers from the southern outskirts of the city. This, of course, shows how much Russia supposedly wants to end the war, right? They're still talking in very bellicose terms about particular places. And of course, he talks about, taking Donbass and then going on taking control of kind of all four oblasts outside of Crimea. Now, Dmitry Medvedev then came out and said, I mean, remember, this guy was formerly the prime minister and the president of the Russian Federation. He says, the stinking Kiev bastard, and this is a full quote, the stinking Kiev bastard is trying to derail the settlement of the conflict. He wants war. Well, now at least he'll have to stay in hiding for the rest of his worthless life. And this is, after the Russians claimed that the Ukrainians had tried to strike at Putin's residence. Now, thankfully, Representative Don Bacon, the Republican representative, who is now feeling much more emboldened to say what he really believes because he's retiring, he's not running again in Nebraska fairly swing district because he knows that the Republicans are going to get tonked, and also he doesn't like Trump. It's clear now that he's not a fan of Trump. He's criticized him on Ukraine a number of times publicly. But good on him for coming out and saying this. You are the invader bombing cities every night and wanting to control Ukrainian territory. If I could direct it, I'd be sending as many weapons to Ukraine to crush your will. Boom, well said. Anyway, we hear today that German Chancellor Friedrich Merz gathered European leaders for urgent consultations on Ukraine peace negotiations. Finnish President Alexander Stubb called it, quote, very useful for consolidating our common assessments. That is excellent. Although someone says behind the scenes, however, the EU Europeans are tightening the screws on Ukraine some more. Hinter den Kulissen warnen die Europäer Zelenskyy. Behind the curtains, the Europeans are warning Zelenskyy. I don't know if that's a correct translation. I don't even know what language that is. It looks German, doesn't it? Hinter, behind, yeah. So that is warnen die Europäer, yeah. Anyway, so the Europeans have got together and had a meeting, which I think indicates how probably frantic they are, given Trump's insanity over the last 24 hours and the fact that he's had 3 phone calls with Vladimir Putin in about 24 hours. Ursula von der Leyen said, good discussion today with the European leaders on our support to Ukraine, its security and the reconstruction of the country. Ultimately, the prosperity of free Ukrainian state lies in the accession to the EU. It's also a key security guarantee in its own right. That's an interesting point. So accession doesn't only benefit countries that join, as the successive waves of enlargement show, the whole of Europe benefits. Of course, they bring their military expertise, tech expertise, food security as well to Europe. I think it would be really important for Ukraine to join Europe. And Ukraine would definitely strengthen Europe, especially in the long run. And that would act as a security guarantee for Ukraine as well. Really important there. Zelenskyy, we are discussing with President Trump the presence of US troops in Ukraine. Interesting. Security guarantees are being implemented in stages. And the number one priority for us is having a monitoring mission simultaneously with a ceasefire. The monitoring mission will be led by our partners who we trust and can technically do it. They have a satellite, the entire drone infrastructure for this. Second part of the security guarantees, it's a written point by point how our partners will react in the event of a ceasefire violation. And that's super important. We need to know very, very bloody clearly every single potential break of a ceasefire. Every violation needs to be gained, and we need to have very clearly what our security guarantors will do if there is any kind of violation. Here's a list of 100 different types of violations, and every different context we can think of, what will happen, what process will be enacted, and what actions will be taken. Really, really important. But interesting, they're talking very formally about American troops in Ukraine there. So it appears, or American forces probably would be kind of support and, I don't know, monitoring rather than actual soldiers. I think that'll be left to the Europeans. Right, Zelenskyy has announced that a meeting with national security advisors from the coalition of the willing countries will take place in Ukraine on January the 3rd. So that's this Saturday, if I'm right. This will be followed by a summit at the leadership level in France on January the 6th, which must therefore be Tuesday. Yes. Just now, Rustam Umarov reported on the agreement with the national security advisors, etc., etc. So that gives you a bit more meat on the bone there for those details. Right. Okay. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk says peace in Ukraine could be achieved within weeks. Citing recent talks with NATO, EU, and Canada. But he adds Kiev would need to accept territorial compromises, and this comes as Trump and Zelenskyy hint at progress, so key issues remain unresolved. So I think in another quote, it's like, let's have a look at this. Just seeing if I can find it. Peace is on the horizon. There is no doubt that things have happened that give grounds for hope that this war can end, and quite quickly, but it's still hope, far from 100% certain. So yeah, it is hope that it could end in a couple of weeks, but really that's far from certain. So yeah, highly unlikely. Now, Syrskyi has said, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, 800,000 troops are sufficient to repel a possible new Russian invasion, but this does not mean abandoning or limiting mobilization. And I guess, if war does break out again, then that 800,000 will be, out the window, and they can just, as long as they've got good plans for mobilization, then they can go beyond that, I presume, in the event that it is necessary. Right, we're just going to go to listen to ex-CIA station chief Dan Hoffman talk on Fox News. So let's listen to him.
Well, President Trump has offered Vladimir Putin a way out, a way for Russia to re-engage with the rest of the world economically, and President Putin has refused. Putin's objective from the very beginning was to overthrow the democratically elected government of Ukraine, and he's failed at that at incredible cost to his own country, over 1 million casualties. He's wrecked his own economy. And so I think the way to stop Russia is literally to stop them in place, to stop their army from advancing another inch of territory, make it clear that the war is a loser for Vladimir Putin. The way you do that is you get NATO to continue to give Ukraine the military equipment and the financial assistance they need. I think that's the way ultimately we're going to have to stop this. The offers to Putin, the negotiations have led nowhere. Well, President...
At what cost? I mean, well, the negotiations have led nowhere. You just, at the cost as it is necessary, because otherwise it'll cost you more in the long run.
After having spent decades of my CIA career trying to see the world through the twisted eyes of Vladimir Putin and taking into account his KGB background, I would say that unfortunately, negotiations with Ukraine have passed as prologue. That's just the road to nowhere, unfortunately. Ukraine has negotiated in good faith. They've made concessions after concessions. However, Russia continues one barrage of missile and drone attacks after another, most recently a couple of days ago, launching attacks on Kyiv and destroying Ukraine's critical infrastructure. So we can continue to negotiate with Ukraine as much as we like, but really the sticking point here is when does Vladimir Putin, and how do we get Vladimir Putin to stop this barbaric war on Ukraine, which has cost so many lives?
Putting the onus back on Putin, and that's very well said.
One is for Ukraine to fight on in self-defense, which is what they've done, and the other is simply to capitulate and agree to all of Vladimir Putin's terms, which means that Ukraine would be subjugated to Russia.
Right.
And from Ukraine's perspective, sometimes you have to fight for your defense of your country, and that's where we're at right now.
100%. And the last one here, I think.
Right. President Zelensky's made that concession as well. However, Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov has already rejected that. And so, look, I think what Vladimir Putin wants is for the United States to negotiate with Ukraine so that the Trump administration and our media direct the frustration over the failure to result in an end to this war at Ukraine rather than where it belongs, at Russia. And so, yes, we can continue to have these negotiations and discussions with Ukraine. That's the easy part. They want peace. It's just that Putin won't give it to them, unfortunately. And look, the Trump administration should be lauded for trying everything we possibly could to bring an end to this war that you might argue never would have begun had we deterred Russia years ago. The Biden administration failed to do that. However, we are where we are.
I don't think that's a Biden administration that failed to deter them particularly. I think it goes back further than that. Georgia and Ukraine in 2014. But anyway, pretty sensible commentary there on Fox News, which is where you need to hear that. Right, Ukrainian and Latvian law enforcement have identified nearly 300 individuals involved in an international cybercrime network. It's stolen 1.6 million euros through refund fraud and laundered funds via cryptocurrency platforms. So 213 Latvians, mainly teenagers, have been recruited for this huge scheme that has involved investigations from both Ukraine and Latvia. Most of these aged 18 to 20. My goodness, I wonder what they do with that many people involved in this. Anyway, I just thought I would, bring you to the attention of this investigation. You can go and look at the details yourself in great, at your own leisure. But we'll move on for now. And we're going to go now to another Euromaidan Press article. This one is about sanctions. So Europe keeps sanctioning Russia, and here's the part it keeps missing. Russia adapts faster than Brussels deliberates. The 20th package is Europe's last chance to prove otherwise. And this is why Europe has actually changed the way it does sanctions. So it's now not waiting for sanctions packages to update existing sanctions and close loopholes. So we have seen a whole bunch of ships that have been added to the 19th or to the existing sanctioned repertoire of sanctioned ships, right? And they added, I don't know what it was, another 12 ships the other day or something like that, rather than waiting to the next package and then adding everything all in one package. It needs to be just a continual thing, and you might need to change the rules in order to do that. But I think they've probably done that because they have added those ships. But this is a cat and mouse game where at the moment the Russians are adapting faster than Brussels deliberates. So that's a real challenge. Is the evasion economy, as the Euromodern press calls it. So they say, consider what Ukrainian troops found when they recovered a KH-101 cruise missile used in the July 2024 strike on Kiev's Okhmadit Children's Hospital. The attack killed 2 people and injured over 50, including cancer patients undergoing treatment. Inside the missile, 28 Western-made components from 15 companies, 2 from Swiss ST Microelectronics, the rest from American firms Texas Instruments, Analog Devices, Intel, and so on. 6 of these companies still operate in Russia. These are modern weapons equipped with modern components, microprocessors, sensors, and navigation units manufactured in Europe, the Americas, Japan, and Taiwan. They arrive in Russia not through sophisticated smuggling, but through ordinary commercial channels routed via intermediaries who face no consequences. Ukrainian intelligence has catalogued over more than 5,000 distinct foreign components across nearly 200 Russian weapon systems. In a single large-scale attack in October 2025, Ukraine identified over 100,000 foreign-made components inside the drones and missiles launched at its cities. American components account for 72% of the foreign parts found in Russian precision weapons. Of course, the American administration really has no truck with that. Not no truck with that. They're not bothered at all with trying to remedy that situation, because actually their American companies are making money and the Trump administration is not really interested in a positive outcome for Ukraine. It's not really at the top of their agenda. They just want a quick outcome that leads to them getting into bed with Russia and making lots of money. But the European Union, on the other hand, is wanting to make sure sanctions are robust and reactive, but they keep having to wait for these big sanctions packages to be passed in the European Parliament, and that gives Russia time to react and find these loopholes. European Union has sanctioned some intermediaries, yet the list is complete. Updates are slow and enforcement is uneven. The shell company sanctioned in Dubai reappears under a new name in Istanbul. A Turkish firm, Margiana Insat This Ticaret continued shipping high-priority items to Russian drone manufacturer SMT iLogic for months after being sanctioned by the US Treasury. The networks are Hydra-headed, and Europe's response has been to cut one head at a time while pretending the creature is dying. So on and so forth. Again, lots more in here. Aggressive enforcement does work, but you've got to keep doing it, and you've got to just be on it the whole time, which is why I've long said one of the most important components in the war against Russia is the US Treasury Department. And under Janet Yellen, they were doing a really good job, and they were tightening things up, and they put a load of things in place just before Biden left. And then Trump came in, and we've not really seen much by the way of the US State Department really going hard at Russia. And that's such a shame. And at the same time, as I showed you in my breaking news update earlier, you've got Tenet Media's Lauren Chen being given a work visa to come and work back in the United States, even though she's a Russian asset. So there's no desire to hold Russia to account here, to put any pressure on Russia. The US has shown that they're fully aligned with Russia, in my honest opinion. Right, then we go to Roman Abramovich, the former Chelsea Football Club owning oligarch, who is supposed to have given over the money he gained for offloading the football club, and I think probably other assets, to Ukraine, to the victims of the war, and yet he still hasn't done so. And I think a lot of that's frozen in the UK, and the UK are now involved in a court case. That he was threatened, Roman Abramovich, the other day by Keir Starmer in Prime Minister's Questions in the House of Commons, and now it turns out that that Abramovich is going to challenge this in court. But what's worse is who is representing him in court. So Roman Abramovich hires top lawyers for Jersey fights. So Jersey is an island off the south coast, well, actually off the north coast of France, but it's part of the United Kingdom. He hires top lawyers for a Jersey fight over £5.3 billion of assets. So what a lot of assets rest just with Roman Abramovich. The outcome of the court battle could have significant implications for UK government's demands that former Chelsea owner releases money from £2.35 billion sale of the club to Ukraine. Now, he's hired some of the world's top lawyers to represent him in his court battle in Jersey, which could have these significant implications. More than £5.3 billion of his money is being frozen by the Jersey courts since 2022 and is subject to a complicated legal case thereafter. An investigation was launched by the Jersey government into the source of the funds. Abramovich's representatives say that 1.4 billion of the 2.35 received from the sale of Chelsea cannot be released to a charitable foundation until the investigation and legal action are dropped by the Jersey government. As reported last week, Abramovich will disregard demands by the Prime Minister Keir Starmer to release all the money from Chelsea sale before March the 17th or to go to a new foundation for Ukraine. Abramovich's heavyweight legal team now includes Lord Wolfson KC. So this is a bit, for me, that rankles. Now, I know everyone is entitled to a defense, but if you are involved with, so who are these people? So after the Conservatives, the previous government, the Conservative government, spend years accusing Keir Starmer of betraying Britain in his work as a former human rights lawyer, Kemi Badenoch's own shadow attorney general, so if you're in the shadow cabinet, or you're the shadow this or the shadow that, means you're the opposition party's version of that. So the shadow chancellor of the exchequer would be the person in the opposition party who's in charge of doing the treasury kind of stuff for the opposition. So here we have the shadow attorney general, so the big lawyer for the Conservative Party, effectively, who looks into all the legal things in the House of Lords. So you have the House of Commons, which is your elected MPs, and then you have too many lords in the House of Lords, which can seek to kind of quite veto, but change bills as they pass through the House of Lords, and they go back to the House of Commons, and then they come back, etc., etc. So this guy is your top Conservative Party lawyer, the shadow attorney general, and he's taken a job representing a sanctioned Russian oligarch. Now, I know he's entitled to defense, right? I'm not saying he's not entitled to lawyers, but if you're the Conservative Party, like, should you be having your top lawyer represent a Russian oligarch to try and stop the British government from using frozen Russian assets to go to Ukraine? I think this is disgusting, personally. And I think the Conservative Party have some answers to give here. This is not acceptable. As Jake Richards MP says, the Tory Shadow Attorney General is now Abramovich's legal counsel, apparently working to protect the assets from efforts to recover them for Ukraine. Barristers should not be judged by the character of their clients, but this political position is clearly untenable. Now, someone challenges him down here, saying, Jake, this may look beguilingly simple at first sight. Not sure it is. Not just about the cab rank rule. Part of the fabric of the rule of law is enabling individuals to challenge the actions of states or governments. How it sounds politically may be a different matter. Yes, says Jake Richards, I'm not talking about David's political position in the shadow cabinet whilst undertaking this legal work. I am talking about that. I hope to have made that clear from the original post. Like, it's just, I'm not criticizing him for taking the case per se. It's just who he is taking the case. Leave it to someone else to do. I'm criticizing him for continuing as shadow attorney general. He can't, in my mind, do both roles appropriately. Like, you are representing like Russian money that otherwise would be sustaining a war effort against Ukraine. And that, I think, complicates the political position of the Conservative Party. And I just think that's not acceptable. But yeah, let me know what you think. But yeah, and if you're a Conservative voter, let me know what you think particularly. Now, Hanno Lustig here says Belgium has successfully blocked confiscation of the Russian assets to fund Ukraine, lecturing other countries on the importance of the rule-based international order. But meanwhile, it's still importing Russian LNG to the port of Zaporizhzhia. Red bars denote imports from Russia, blue bars from the US, grey from other countries. After the transit ban imposed in March 2025, Belgium simply started to import for its own use instead of helping the Russians ship the LNG to destinations outside the EU, is the claim here. So there you have the really quite a lot of gas that they are still importing, and we are almost at the end of 2025 now. So there, make of that what you will. Right, we're going to go on to, I'm wondering whether this guy was a guy sitting at the end of the table for the American delegation speaking to the Ukrainians. It looks like him. Anyway, it's a guy called Gardner. So he says a plan to turn the EU into a defense force conflicts with American interests. Quote, NATO will hopefully continue to exist for centuries, but the EU will disappear. Wow. So you've got like top Americans saying, look, the EU is going to disappear. They shouldn't be entitled to have their own armed forces, because, or if they do, it completely conflicts with American interests. So Europeans told to stand up on their own 2 feet. You need to be doing more for your own security. You should not be relying on Americans to provide your own security. Okay, we'll do that. We'll get an army. Oh, no, you can't have an army. No, that's against our interests. Oh, what? So who's making the rules around here in Europe? Is it us or is it you guys? So as this source says, so we cannot have a European army because it conflicts with American interests. Very sovereign to dictate other countries what other countries can or cannot do. The Heritage Foundation should be classified as a terrorist organization undermining European unity. And of course, the Heritage Foundation is running the White House, and they are actually dead against the EU just in general. So yeah, it's just watch out for the Heritage Foundation. As you well know, from listening to me for as long as you have, I'm sure many of you, I am no fan of the Heritage Foundation. Right. Then just sort of moving sort of sideways, but not wholly. This is connected to Ukraine still. Breaking news. Donald Trump announces a plan to fight this, slightly tongue-in-cheek. So, you know, he's announced these new battleships, the Golden Fleet, that are going to be 100 times more powerful than any previous battleship. Really? Okay. Donald Trump announces a plan to fight the future wars using a strategy from 1944. In a bold move described by experts as aggressively nostalgic, President Trump announced plans to build 20 to 25 brand new Trump-class battleships for the US Navy, creating thousands of jobs and at least several thousand follow-up PowerPoint decks, explaining why this made sense at the time. These ships will be 100 times more powerful than the Iowa class, Trump said confidently, while refusing to clarify whether powerful meant militarily, emotionally, or spiritually. Each battleship will cost a modest $10 billion, roughly the price of several functioning healthcare systems. Pentagon officials confirmed the ship can be destroyed by a $10,000 drone torpedo operated by a teenager with a gaming laptop and a decent Wi-Fi. Military strategists immediately praised the plan for its commitment to fighting the next war exactly like World War II, but with worse odds. Russia's Black Sea Fleet reportedly volunteered as a case study in why this might not go so great, noting that most of it's currently serving as artificial reef. Critics also raised minor logistical questions such as where these ships will be built, since the US currently lacks enough wharf capacity. Trump responded by asking if Timu ships overnight and whether dry dock is a real thing or just woke naval jargon. Supporters remain optimistic, pointing out that Trump-branded ventures have a long and inspiring history of success, resilience, and absolutely not collapsing into casino bankruptcy. I just found that really beautifully well written there and funny, but also quite poignant and important to note. Now, talking about American military power, we heard of the strikes in Nigeria, northwestern Nigeria, a village there. Malcolm Nance, who I've interviewed before, he said Nigeria strike bluff. The bluff is like TLDR, your shorthand for what happened. Operation Luma Menage, 20 again tongue-in-cheek, $20 million wiffle ball swing and a miss. Town of Yobo, Sokoto State, has no recent history of ISWAP and are happy Christian Muslims. 3 of 12 missiles did not detonate. Near misses on a local hospital, no casualties. So saying it really was not a successful strike at all. So yeah, that is his analysis of what happened in Nigeria. He's got another quick one here. Nigeria, no casualties. And then he's actually posted the CNN piece that says fear and confusion in Nigerian village hit in US strike, as locals say there's no history of ISIS in the area. Classic strike based on ancient intelligence, no RT human or signals intelligence, no real-time pre-strike eyes on the target, maybe a drone saw it, they phoned this in. So reliant on really old intelligence, no humans in the area given them actual intelligence, no signals intelligence, no intercepts or anything. They just blew up a village or tried to blow up a village, and 3 out of the 15 odd missiles didn't even detonate. A bit of a performance, but also a bit of a kind of disaster, I think, really. It didn't quite do what it was intended to do. They've also struck at ports infrastructure in Venezuela as well. So, here is the president of peace, right? Now, it's worth well, I was just going to talk Epstein. Actually, I'm not. If you've never seen Donald Trump's blathering invitation to Putin for the Miss Universe pageant in Moscow, here it is. Just wow. So this is Donald Trump writing to Putin back in 2013, just 1 year before, or less than a year, I think, before Russia invaded Ukraine initially, or annexed, sent their little green men into Ukraine. Dear Mr. President, says Trump, I hope you have heard by now the exciting news that we are bringing the Miss Universe 2013 pageant to Russia for the first time in the 62-year history of the pageant. We will partner with Crocus Group and Aras Agalarov to stage the event on November the 9th at Crocus City Hall. The Miss Universe pageant is watched by over 1 billion people, is it? Worldwide, and is one of the most watched TV shows anywhere in the world. I'm not sure it is, actually. I know that our Moscow pageant will be our biggest and best Miss Universe ever, and we are already overwhelmed with a very positive and extensive response from both international and Russian media. We turned down many competing countries in favor of Russia. I want to take this opportunity to personally invite you to be my guest of honor in Moscow on November the 9th. I know you will have a great time. With best wishes, Donald J. Trump. And he then handwrites the world's most beautiful woman. So there you go. This was in the Russian investigation files, but I just think that's quite interesting, and you know, cozying up with Putin. Why did it go to Russia and not anywhere else? What was Trump wanting out of Russia at that time? Was it about getting a Trump hotel built in Moscow? Is it still something that Trump would want to do? Russia could back China in a potential war over Taiwan, according to the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Moscow again rejected any form of Taiwanese independence, calling the island an inseparable part of China. The statement comes as Beijing tests new hypersonic anti-ship weapons. Oh dear, that's not looking good. Now, I've talked to you at length before about what's happened, what would happen, and what is happening, and what will happen post-Brexit. So the UK came out of Brexit. We had the EU, the largest trade bloc in the world. We had all these very favorable trade deals with all these other nations that the EU could negotiate from a very, very strong position, meaning that they were very favorable to the UK. The UK then came out, and in 2016, when I was publicly debating this, I said, mark my words, we will be economically punished for Brexit, because we will be trying to renegotiate all of these trade deals, 70-odd trade deals that we had under the EU with these countries from a weaker position, so we'll get worse trade deals. Then we went out, and the Conservative Party, who was in government at the time, went out and did a trade deal with Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, and admitted themselves that those deals were terrible. And they still admit that those deals are terrible. It's like, okay, we can't even do good deals with Australia and New Zealand, and we're supposedly a bigger economy than them and in a more powerful position. What is going on? Anyway, one of the things I said is you will see several things that are negotiated that the US particularly will want to see an end of. That is health and safety and food hygiene regulation, environmental regulation as well, but will be on the cards. On the table, and NICE, which benchmarks our drug prices and 25% of the world's drug prices. That's incredibly important. And digital sales tax and digital regulation. Those are the big things that the US will say, don't want any of that. And lo and behold, what I've been talking about now for months and months, it turns out that the White House demands British supermarkets stock chlorinated chicken. It's pushing Sir Keir Starmer to make concessions on food standards. And that is what is of course going to happen. Great news for anyone in the UK looking to grow a third arm and possibly acquire superpowers. Worth mentioning, the US chlorinated chicken is banned for human consumption in the EU, probably under some chemical weapons treaty. So basically, the EU has regulations on food hygiene so that you don't have to get to a point where you're washing these things in chlorine, because actually the hygiene of these chickens is much better, because they've been processed much more in a much more stringent manner, using a lot of regulation, health and safety standards. In the US, that doesn't exist so much. So in the end, they just try and solve it by taking these pretty manky chickens and then cover them in chlorine, and then cling filming them up and putting them on the shelves and say, there, go and buy some chicken. And Europe's like, no, that sucks, that chicken. Chlorine washing chicken is not a good way to go. We don't want to buy that, and so you can't buy it in the EU. But now we're out of the EU, we still have most EU regulations, but the US is therefore going to surely be looking at picking off all of our EU era regulations so that they can make us buy crappy stuff in the United States that we wouldn't otherwise buy in order to force their exports on us, and therefore lower our own standards in the UK. And that will bring our own food and safety hygiene standards down in the UK. And that is what I predicted 9 years ago. And that is what is happening now. Who knew? Oh, everyone said, oh, you're fear-mongering, you're fear-mongering. It's like, no, it will happen. It will happen. It did. Because you've got to remember as well that we didn't really come out the EU till 2020, 2021, right? It took that many years to negotiate a deal without any negotiations, without any, like, we had a hard Brexit in the end with no kind of deals going on, and we're getting punished for it now, economically speaking. Anyway, so that's what the US is forcing on us. Now, it's really interesting to look at Donald Trump's popularity around Europe. Savchenko Vladimir here says Trump is unpopular in Europe, according to Politico, even among supporters of the right-wing populist parties that he supports. Trump is most popular, and I talked about this recently, and I was picked up by a Reform supporter who was actually possibly going to run for it as a Reform candidate. He's saying, look, can you stop saying that Reform supports Russia, blah, 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 and Trump? But actually, when you look at the stats, they are much more likely to favor Putin, much more likely to favor Putin over Zelensky, and much more likely to favor Donald Trump. And this is the case from this latest study. So Trump is most popular in the UK, in the whole of Europe, in the UK, with 50% of Reform UK supporters having a positive view of him. However, in France and Germany, only about a third of National Rally and AfD supporters have a positive view of the US president. So that's interesting. 30% of Rassemblement National and AfD, 34%. Wow, Trump is even less popular among the general population. In France and Germany, 2/3 of respondents have a negative view of him. In the UK, 55% of respondents said they have a negative opinion. Trump is the least popular in Canada, 72% of negative ratings. So, wow, the UK really does have, and this is one that I showed you previously. This is from August 2025. Do you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of the following? And then favorable opinion of Zelensky, only 52% of Reform, whereas in other parties like Lib Dems, it's 84%, Conservatives 78%, Labour 74%, Greens 67%. Donald Trump, Reform 52%, which is almost double the Conservatives on 27%, and then all the other parties really low for Trump. 3% in the Greens, 5%, 8% in Labour, 5% for Lib Dems. JD Vance, 1% Greens, 5% Labour, 3% Lib Dems, 12% Conservatives, 35% Reform. And then Putin, 1% Greens, 3% Labour, 2% Lib Dems, 2% Conservatives, 8% in this one for Reform. But that is like 4 times as many as like the Conservatives, almost 3 times as many than Labour. So considerably more like Putin, and considerably more like Donald Trump in Reform UK. But I think this one in Politico might be even more recent than the August YouGov survey here. Anyway, I just thought that was worth sharing with you. And then I thought I'd share with you Anthony Scaramucci here talking for a little bit on Donald Trump.
He's a terrible leader. He's hurt the country. The tariffs have been, even Jerome Powell said yesterday, the tariffs have been ridiculously inflationary to the country. The average person in the country is struggling more today than they were 8 or 9 months ago. And so, no. And also the rhetoric against our allies is absurd. There's no reason to have that type of rhetoric against our allies. He seems to be overly sympathizing with our adversaries. So, no, I'm a very open person about how I feel about the situation. This is not normal politics. If you watch him on Truth Social and you read his tweets, they're just not normal. It's not normal. We're normalizing something that's very abnormal. And I think Marjorie Taylor Greene actually said it better than me. They hate him, but they're afraid of him. They're unwilling to speak out. But we got to get much smarter people in these jobs, and we got to get principle-based people in these jobs, people that are not so interested in self-enrichment and more interested in serving the public. He's a terrible leader.
Okay, to which this source says, what many Americans don't seem to grasp is that in Europe, so that you've got this whole Europe-US rift going on, which I think is really dangerous for obviously global unity, but for support for Ukraine, for European and American prosperity and security and stability. So this guy says, what many Americans don't seem to grasp is that in Europe, the damage to the US-EU relations is no longer a historical debate. It's an ongoing reality. Trust collapsed before, but now the same patterns are back. Tariffs, hostility towards allies, threats to NATO commitments, and open contempt for European institutions. Public trust in US leadership across Europe remains extremely low. Polling shows widespread skepticism, and European governments openly talk about strategic autonomy because reliance on Washington is seen as politically unstable. The conversation didn't exist at this scale before. Trade tensions are back, diplomatic rows are back, and even visa and regulatory disputes have returned. European businesses and governments are openly planning around the assumption that the US may act again unpredictably. So I was just talking about, trade spats with the UK there about chlorinated chicken, people's opinions across Europe about Trump, and then the tech arguments going on and sanctioning 5 Europeans. This isn't anti-American sentiment, it's damage control. When the same behavior repeats, people adjust accordingly. And the longer this goes on, the harder it becomes to undo. Trust, once broken twice, doesn't reset easily. Even future administrations will inherit skepticism, contingency planning, and a Europe that no longer assumes the United States is automatically reliable. You can say F off if you want, but the consequences don't care. Europe will keep hedging, diversifying alliances, building autonomy, and planning as if US support might disappear again, because that's what repeated instability teaches allies to do. I read a fascinating Financial Times piece today about how, just in defense, how European defense manufacturers, big ones, are making loads of money because of support for Ukraine, and they're actually paying loads of dividends. I think £5 billion worth of dividends this year. And American manufacturers like your Lockheed Martins, your Raytheons, they are going down from the height of 2023, and that's because Europe is going, screw you, America, we're going to buy our stuff in-house, and the US is going to struggle because of the foreign diplomatic policies of the Trump administration. And I wonder whether there'll be any kind of lobbying from the military industrial complex in the US for Trump to stop being so offensive to his allies. And then we have Thierry Breton, who is one of the head guys in the former European commissioner. He's a guy that has been sanctioned by the US. He's one of 5 people sanctioned. So I'm not going to play you this French TF1 interview, but but I'm going to just tell you a little bit what is said here by someone who's translated it. Thierry Breton responds to US sanctions on primetime French TV. The sanction is an attack on the EU and a test of whether Europe is willing to push back. Quote, "We must resist. It is existential for Europeans. It's now or never." He said, "Over the past year, we've had European institutions that are weak, far too weak. In a world we live in, surrounded by predators, we have to call things by their name. That weakness leads directly to situations like this. Just look at this week. An EU commissioner who did his job is banned from the United States simply for doing that job. At the same time, the US vice president starts suggesting that perhaps France and the UK should be stripped of control over nuclear weapons because it might be dangerous to leave it to them. And we have the attempt at a hostile takeover of Greenland. All of that in 1 week. What does it tell us? It tells us we have to resist, we must be tougher, and perhaps we should use this signal to end on a more positive note to say that everyone who has felt humiliated or wounded should stand up and say no. Now, in this kind of sacred union, we must resist because it is our destiny at stake. It is existential for Europeans. It's now or never." That is where we are in the world, and I will keep coming back to it because it is important. That rift between the US and the EU and Europe as a whole is egregious, and it is Trump's fault. It is the Heritage Foundation's fault. It is the Trump administration, people like Russell Vought and Stephen Miller and Adam Baker and all of these problematic people that are behind the scenes devising national security strategies and economic policies that attack the EU but leave Russia and other dictatorial regimes untouched and favor countries in the EU like Hungary. Now, just to point out, as The Guardian has done, that more than 20% of videos shown to new YouTube users are AI slop, study finds. And just in case, no, I'm not AI. I'm not AI, and I'm not glitching. Honestly, I'm a real human being. Look, ow, I'm a real human being. AI could do that too. God, this is Rene Descartes' evil demon, as it came later to be known, and was, of course, manifested in the Matrix. So how can you prove you are not, having all your senses put into your head by an evil demon? How can you prove you're not in a Matrix experience machine? How can I prove I'm not AI? I could just, all of my proving to you could be done by programming the parameters of the AI. Damn it. Anyway, I promise you I'm not. No, I'm not AI. But just be warned, loads of people have been saying to me recently, actually, that they've come up across way more YouTube AI stuff than previously. And of course, I don't know if it's any more likely to be disinformative, but disinformation is rife online, and we need to be very, very careful at all times. I think I've given myself a headache by slapping myself around the face. Right. So then we have just another egregious thing to say, this time not with Zelensky, but with Benjamin Netanyahu. So the question is, China is doing naval exercises. Oh, and I haven't reported this, but China is doing these really big naval exercises that are very aggressive all the way around Taiwan at the moment. They're essentially gaming invading Taiwan. So the question is, what are you doing about it? What's your opinion here, Donald Trump? How strong are you going to be in standing up to Xi Jinping? Let's see how strong Donald Trump is, shall we? Shall we have a guess to see how strong Donald Trump is? Have a guess in your head, the sort of thing he'd say, and see if you're right. Is he going to stand strong and support for Taiwan? Or is he going to say, oh, I love Xi Jinping, he's a lovely guy, I want to wax his back?
Doing naval exercises basically to test encircling Taiwan. Can you explain to us what your knowledge is of that? What do you think about that? Have you had any discussions with China?
Well, I have a great
that?
relationship with President Xi.
Oh.
And he hasn't told me anything about it. I
hasn't
certainly
he?
have seen it, but he hasn't told me anything about it. And I don't believe he's going to be doing it. No, nothing worries me.
But
Nothing.
You said where there's smoke, there's fire, right? So if
Yeah.
you're if you're doing naval exercises and air
Well,
exercises.
I've been doing naval exercises for 20 years in that area. Now people take it a little bit differently, but in fact, larger than they're doing right now. So we'll see. But they've been doing that for 20, 25 years. Yeah.
I'm not sure it is larger than they'd be doing it now. They've got their Chinese fishing militia. They've got their Coast Guard boats. They're doing all sorts with the Filipinos, and there are massive exercises around Taiwan. I'm not sure that's true. He's just so flippant. He's blasé. He's like, oh, I've got a great relationship with Xi. I don't believe he's going to do it, so I'm not worried. Nah, well, whatever. Yeah, I'll wax his back later. I'll have me some Xi hair. Just, oh man. And just, would you believe it? I mean, it's starting to get embarrassing. It was embarrassing before. You remember the FIFA Peace Award? Because he didn't get his Nobel Peace Prize, that FIFA went around scrabbling around, oh, we better give him an award then. It gave him this crappy award that apparently had to be the same size as the World Cup. Had to be as tall as the World Cup, that trophy. Well, not only was he given a FIFA Peace Prize, he's going to be given an Israeli prize.
And to Israel, it's been my honor. And the award that I was given was really surprising and very much appreciated.
Well, President Trump has broken so many conventions to the surprise of people, and then they figure out, oh, well, maybe, he was right after all. So we decided to break a convention too, or create a new one, and that is to award the Israel Prize, which in almost our 80 years, we've never awarded it to a non-Israeli, and we're going to award it this year to President Trump. This was announced formally over lunch.
He would just do whatever Netanyahu wants now. There you go. Just putty in your hands. Donald Trump is a national security threat to the United States because strongman leaders like Netanyahu and Putin can just give him trinkets and bits of gold and prizes and say nice things to him on the telephone, and they'll do whatever they want. That is sickening. And on that note, thank you very much for watching. Take care. And if you can spare a moment and a penny or two, if you can go to atpgeo.com/donate, you can go to the Car for Ukraine fundraiser, which is presently at just almost 8,500 spondulis, and we're almost at our goal of a truck for the 93rd Brigade Kolodny Yar unmanned systems unit. That would be fantastic. In the meantime, though, take care. Speak to you soon. Toodle pips.